Is Pastor Jiwon Lee. I'm the pastor here. And it's good to see like new faces. I feel like every week, I think just being in the intersection of Seoul, I feel like we get a lot of travelers and people that are just kind of passing through. And if you live in Korea or some part of Seoul, we welcome you as well, or Gyeonggi-do. Our core group, we have quite a lot of people that have come from all over Seoul. So it's quite there's no like one common denominator under all of it. It's just I feel like the Lord has just really brought a good mix of people through our church. And so we planted in October last year. And so we're a 3-month-old church, and it's been a real fun journey. I think we're just beginning to, or I feel like we're just beginning to catch a breath and just feel like, oh, we planted. Like the dust is kind of settling, and we're like, oh, we did it. We did a thing, like it's been planted. And so like a seed has been planted or a tree has been planted. Now I feel like we're in the process of week by week watering what has been planted, and God is the one that grows the church. And so it's been honor, I think, for our church and our core members to just have front view seats of what God is doing here in our church, but also in Seoul. And we've been going through a series on reconnect, and it's kind of a play on words. It's like reconnect, and it means, obviously reconnecting with God, community, and the city, but also real connections. The re and the connect, the real connections of like, we want church to be real. We want church and the connections and the time that we have in church to be less about the formality or the religious or the ritual of it, but we want it to be something that's real. And I believe that that's what God's heart is. God's heart doesn't want just the external expression of morality, but God wants our hearts. God wants the real thing. God wants our raw honesty and what we bring and what we carry. We've been talking about more about the vertical relationship and reconnecting with God for the last few weeks, as we've been diving into the story of Emmaus, the two on the road to Emmaus. And today we're going to be having more of a focus on community. And it's been quite a nice actual week for me. I connected with a friend. And just like, it was one of those connections where you just kind of sit with your friend and you just connect, and it's like time slows down, or it feels like it's a flow state, Like if you've ever been with a friendship where it's like, you don't have to explain all the details, but you just kind of share one thing and it just communicates right to the heart. You know that they heard you, no miscommunication, and then they speak back to you in that flow state. And so it was nice to have like a flow state kind of conversation with one of my friends, and time just went by real fast. And like it got me thinking. There are relationships and conversations that you have with people, and just like one connection with somebody and one word or phrase that they might share can kind of linger for a while. It can get you thinking. It can kind of like, I don't want to say trigger, because trigger's a bad word these days, but it could touch a topic that's been dormant, something that you haven't thought about, an aspect of you that you haven't seen. And so all that to say, I just felt like there's such power in friendship and relationships, in real relationships where we go deep. It reminds me of a quote, and it says that community is the place of healing, but community is also the place of hurt. That in the same space where we can get healing is the same space that we can get hurt. In relationship, we can experience some of the greatest pains in our life, but only in relationships can we be healed. And so, I thought of like my marriage with Janice. Our 8th year anniversary is coming up on Tuesday this week. And so we've been married 8 years, and we're going into our 3rd kid as well. Sorry, this mic is a little distracting for me, so let me just change it. Our 8-year anniversary, and it's like, even when I think about healing relationship, it's like my marriage with Janice has been so healing. the biggest heartbreaks that can happen in our lives happen through relationships. But also the healing comes through that same channel, comes through the same channel. And so our growth doesn't happen in a vacuum. Our growth doesn't happen in isolation. Contrary to popular belief these days, our growth happens very much in relationship and community, where our hearts are exposed, where our real heart, what's hidden, it surfaces and it comes to the surface. In isolation, in my head, I can neatly organize all my thoughts, compartmentalize my emotions, kind of build a good fence and a system around me. But the moment I connect with somebody and open myself up into relationship and go into a community, there are things that just begin to happen. Positive things, calibration, inspiration, sharpening, but also negative things happen too. Things that have been hidden in my heart. Emotions, anger, hurt, defensiveness, pride, insecurity. A lot of things begin to trigger when we're in relationship. On our path to transformation, real connection begins with God, but it is not separate to relationship and community. It happens when we open not only to God, so real transformation happens not only when we open to God, but when we open to the ones around us as well. When we open in honesty, when we open in radical honesty to God and to others, transformation begins to occur. That's the way that God works. That's the way that God has worked, and that's the way that God continues to work. It's not a very radically it's not a radical concept. It's quite simple. The vertical and the horizontal. When it opens, the Lord is able to work. God is able to work. And so am I walking with others in relationship? Am I in community? I love Jesus, but don't like religion. Love Jesus, but not the people. Love Jesus, not the pastor. Love Jesus, but I can't do people. I think that is an untrue statement. Cannot be. You cannot love Jesus and not love the church. You were made. It limits your growth. First off, if we're just talking about yourself, it limits your growth. It stunts your growth. You were made to walk in relationship. You were made to walk in intimacy. You were made to walk trusting, open. You were meant to walk as a channel, not a dam. You've heard before, it takes a village to raise a child. And it takes a village to raise disciples. Disciples that are healthy, disciples that are walking with God. And I think we live in kind of a wild transition stage of history. In modern times, I think we've it's become more believable to think that we can live our lives individualistically and alone. The false pretense that somehow I can be self-made and I can just, shut out all the uncomfortability and the mess and kind of design my life to be very convenient for myself, just pick and choose and make it very small. And if I can just cut out all that toxicity and I just focus on myself, somehow I'll be the best version of myself. But according to the way that God has designed it, that's impossible. We were made to flourish in relationship. We're relational beings. And so, when I was journeying, I grew up in Australia 20 years and then took my step out to America and I did 10 years there. It wasn't an easy process. I grew up, I feel like for me, the theme of my life has been very much the immigrant experience. My parents immigrated to Australia when I was 3, and so I had all of my schooling up to college, graduated college in Australia. And so for me, I feel like I grew up in an immigrant family, first gen, so I'm really my parents didn't have much money, so just growing up and kind of going through the phases. and not really understanding my parents, right? It's like, Mom, why are you making me go to church? Like, why are you making me do these cultural things that don't really benefit my life in Australia as an Australian? And so I'm caught in the middle. And then when I went out to America, it's like it was my immigrant story. Sure, I speak English. Sure, I grew up in a Western world, but I did not fit with the cultural code of America. And so I felt very, it was a huge step of faith. And I went out with the family and the friends, just no even map. I just kind of went. And it was really starting from the ground up. And just that whole journey that I had in America, I felt very unseen. And it's not something that that I was even expecting to get. Because when you change country, you set your expectations. I'm not like going to change the world. Like, I'm just going there. I'm being faithful to God. And I want to just be as faithful as I can wherever God positions me. And I was there, but I think if I were to describe to you now, looking back 10 years, I look back and I'm like, man, it was a tough season. It was very lonely. It was hard. It's harder to connect with people that are not from your home country. When you don't share context, when you don't share cultural values, identity is very much shaped by culture and your relationship in the community and the area that you grow up in. We latch onto these ideas as our identity, aspects as our identity. And so what happens when all of that is stripped and you're in a foreign land and you're with people that you don't know and you're starting from scratch? In some ways, don't get me wrong, it's refreshing. You get a blank slate. You get to start again. But in many other ways, for my soul, if I'm speaking about my soul, I felt very unknown and unseen, right? Because I'm not just seen and loved for who I am and who I was growing up. Everyone saw me. We have shared experience. But now I'm in a new place. Everything's tied to what I do and what I accomplish. And so for me, my heart was very like, oh man, there was this constant, like, it was a layer of misemonji. That's kind of what I expected. Just descended. And it was just there. I'm breathing it in every day, and I see it sometimes, but it comes, I feel it more at times. I don't notice it at times, but it was just there. This sense of loneliness. I'm alone. I think it's quite common in the immigrant experience to feel like, man, this is a shock. It's a shock to the soul. Because especially if you felt rooted in one country and then you go to another country, you feel the difference. You feel the loss. I was so interconnected in Australia, in Sydney. And then all of a sudden, transplanted somewhere, don't feel that same connection. It's a shock to the soul. And it takes time. It takes time to ease into that level of like stripping, to coming into peace with it, to not like fight to be known a certain way, but to be at peace, to be rooted in God. I think in my season in America, like first 3 years, I was clinging to God, like my life. God, hate this country, hate America, like. And I was just like miserable, honestly. 5 years, it's like, oh, I feel like it's kind of getting better, but still hard. It's a stripping process. It's intense. When your identity has been shaped a certain way and you being known for who you are, when that is faded and you don't have that same source and structure, you don't have that flowing into you, how do you survive? I'm like, how do you survive if you're not Christian? Just go back home, you know? It's not easy. And going back home's not easy. Because the moment you leave home, it becomes fossilized. It's the memory of your hometown. It's fossilized in your mind. It's locked in time. Your friendships, your friends, your family, people you grew up around, they move on. You get married, there's time that flows by. And they're moving on with their lives as you've been moving on. But your memory of home is like, it's locked. Oh, it was a good time, my friends, relationships, it's all sweet. When you go back, depending on how much time has passed, it's like, whoa, it's the reacclimation. I mean, I share all of that because God brought so many new friends along the way in America. My time in America was great, honestly. But I think there was definitely a frequency that was always hard. But I think in the midst of all of that, I think God brought so many rich friendships, but it was different to what I expected and what I felt, what I needed. There were moments where I had to open to them. I had to choose to open to people. God, I want this type of friend. I only connect with this type of person. And if I stayed in that frame, I'd miss all the opportunities of the people that God had put in front of me. So I remember having to open my heart and my mind and be like, God, I'm open. Be the friend that you want, that you need. You be that friend. And I remember these moments where I had to open my heart. I couldn't be like, oh, this guy's not my vibe. This guy's not part of my tribe. I was so stubborn. I was like, God, my friends were so good back at home. I don't want to connect with these guys. I don't have shared values in a deep way. So I was just kind of just focusing on school. And I'm going to do my thing. I'm like, just narrow it down to make it work. But I remember God saying, you can't survive like that. You can't do it alone. You need friends. You need to open up. And I was like, okay, God, give me friends. And God's like, I put them all around you. Your heart's not open. And I remember opening to them. And I got married like I said, it's my 8-year anniversary. You guys are kind of a tough crowd, man. I'm like, oh, 8-year anniversary. You guys just looking at me like, good for you, man. So I'm loving this place. All right, no worries, no pressure. But I got married in America, and three of my groomsmen were from Australia. 3 of them were from America. Then I have my blood brother. And so I think it was kind of a redemptive picture of like, I did struggle, but like God brought so many good friends that I'm still friends with now along the way. And I had to open to Him. The good news, I think, as a sojourner, for many of us in this room that are living in Korea, the good news is that as you come to Korea and as you've left your hometown and homeland, the opportunity is to allow the Lord to strip down all the built up identities of the world, to embrace that process, to not have any other attachment but Jesus, to come to the core. One opportunity. And number 2 opportunity is to open courageously. You have the opportunity to open courageously to the people around you and to find new brothers, sisters, mothers, and fathers that you never thought or knew you could have. We have an opportunity as sojourners to embrace the stripping process as God-given and to give ourselves away in the midst of that process. It's a richer process, but it is a painful process. It's not an easy process. You see in our passage today, the moment that their eyes opened was in community. The moment that their eyes opened was in the act of breaking bread together. So you see, we kind of been going through a series, open hearts. They opened their hearts in conversation on the road. They were talking, and through their heartbreak, they were opening their hearts to one another and to Jesus. That was one part of the process. Then as their hearts were opened, Jesus began to teach them. And so Jesus began to open their minds through scripture and teaching. And we come to this moment now as they're now settling out at the end of the day at a place, at a table, they're eating. And finally, it's in the moment. They don't recognize Jesus until this moment when He finally breaks bread and opens the bread to them. It says, let's read it. In verse 30, it says, when He was at the table with them, He took the bread, blessed and broke it, and gave it to them. And their eyes were opened, and they recognized Him, and He vanished from their sight. There's power in the act of breaking bread. The process, the part of the process is when you see the significance of Jesus' body that was broken. See, they finally understood it intellectually. If you read the previous verses, They got to understand why Jesus had to come and die upon the cross. But it was actually in the act of communion and the Eucharist that their eyes actually opened. It wasn't through the knowledge that their eyes opened, but it was through them seeing before them in reality the act of breaking bread. Now, I want to just kind of jog your memory a little bit. In Luke chapter 22, verse 19, this is when Jesus was about to go to the cross. And he's like, I eagerly desired this. This is what I wanted to do with my friends. In my last moments with my friends, this is what I wanted to do. And it says, he took the bread, and when he had given thanks, he broke it and gave it to them, saying, this is my body, which is given for you. Do this in remembrance of me. The last thing that Jesus eagerly desired to do before the cross with his friends was to break bread and have communion with them, to do the Eucharist. And he said, remember me. Whenever you do this, remember me. You know, the Eucharist is the word, it's a Greek word, and it means to give thanks. And in the Eucharist word, charis, in the middle of it is charis, which is the Greek word for grace. And there's a grace that's hidden in the act of communion. Stick with me. There is, in Jesus' breaking and crushing, in Jesus being taken, broken and crushed and given, in this act, there's grace. Hidden is the grace of God. When Jesus was about to be crushed and crucified, Jesus gave thanks. He blessed it. He gave thanks to the Lord before he went into his process of breaking. Jesus did not shield himself from the pain. He didn't shield himself from rejection. He did not shield himself into the painful process that would have humiliated him and ultimately killed him. Jesus entered it with thanksgiving. He went with a heart of thanksgiving, understanding that there was grace hidden in that, in the act of crushing and stripping. It's a communion paradox. An author wrote a book called The Broken Way, called Anne Voskamp. And she said, communion is a great truth in great paradox. Out of the abundance of the love of God, union from fullness, he broke and gave it away. Somehow, the miracle, the intimacy of communion comes through brokenness. God, not in his neediness, not because he needed me, God, not because he was desperate for connection or he was lonely and he was bored, but in the fullness of who God was, he became flesh. He walked with us. He became human. He hung on the cross. He willingly put himself in a position where he would be broken so that he could be given away. God, the miracle of the gospel, it came through brokenness. The act of vulnerability, the opening of myself, the opening of oneself. Is it easy? Is it easy to open up vulnerably in this world today? In our workplaces, our families, even in our friendships? Is it not sad sometimes that there are friendships, family relationships, there are spaces at our work, even at church at times? Is it not sad that at times it's hard to be vulnerable? To be vulnerable can be hard, especially when we have experienced deep rejection before, where we've opened up and it's been used against us. We've opened up and again people have just said, why? They've shunned you. To experience rejection in that way when you're vulnerable is one of the most traumatic things that you can experience for the human soul. Let's not underplay it. Let's not be the tough guy. To be rejected when we open up and when we're vulnerable, it's difficult. It takes years sometimes when it's significant pain from people close to us. It takes significant time and work to open up our hearts again. community is not easy. Can I get something here today? Community easy for you? I don't know, man. I mean, if you tell me the secret, community isn't easy. There's spiky people, spiky communities. I've been in church, came from church splits. Spiky, man. Trust, you earn it, right? Trust, huh? Been in such hurtful communities. I've been hurt, but I know for sure I've also hurt. I've been spiky too. We all have our spiky moments. Hurt people, hurt people. As we follow Jesus as his disciples in this world, we inevitably follow his path of crushing and stripping. That's the path. We will be stripped. We will feel at times vulnerable, crushed, broken. But the journey that's marked with brokenness and suffering, it's the right path in the gospel. The inner journey, the kind of the messy parts, like where there's some cuss words and real raw emotions like anger, can get violent, messy down there. Where there's real pain, it's vulnerable, it's flesh. It's hard, it just hurts there. Behind all the platitudes and our smiles that we put on, there is stuff down there for all of us. We live in a broken world. And when God is leading us into a deeper faith, a deeper relationship with him, he teaches us how to wade through that mess. He teaches us how to wade through the reality of our humanity. God doesn't just transform us. Be better. Don't be angry. Don't road rage. Just doesn't zap us like that. He leads us through the reality of our mess, what's really inside. And as it is exposed to God and as it is exposed in confession and in vulnerable relationships with one another in community, we experience the channels and the flows of God's grace. It begins to flow. The water begins to trickle. And so the question I believe in our discipleship is, how do I break gracefully? How do I break and embrace this season? And this might not be relevant to some of y'all, but I'm talking about some of you guys that have walked with Jesus for years. And maybe there's like a wall in your relationship with God. And it's like, there's a good rhythm of it, but maybe your heart kind of feels there's a block. The Lord wants to lead us to open. He wants to meet. He doesn't want to meet our words, what we present, our platitudes. He doesn't want that. He wants our hearts. It requires, I believe, to break gracefully and to go deeper in our relationship with God. It requires that we understand that it's God who is actually leading us in that journey, in that dance. And I believe that when we begin to understand that he is the one leading us into the messiness and into the hardship, into the pain, then we can begin to trust that God is doing something significant and deep in our hearts and in our souls. When we look at Jesus, he broke gracefully. He broke quietly, prayerfully. He unraveled in the safety of God's love for him. He remained steadfast in God's will. He walked in step with Jesus, and he broke gracefully. He allowed himself to be hung, ultimately on the cross. And it was only in the safety of God's love for him, in his sonship, in his identity that was so firm and steadfast, that he was able to walk such a difficult and painful path. There's a quote that I want to share with you guys. And it says, the very thing that we are afraid of. This is Paul Miller. He's written a couple of books on prayer that's really helpful. But he says the very thing that we are afraid of, our brokenness, is the door to our Father's heart. The brokenness is a door to our Father's heart. The point is not to keep it all together, to be polished Christians, professional Sunday Christians. But it's actually to be fully human in our experience as humans walking this earth. With Him, we're unraveling. We allow our hearts to be honest, to crack open. The point is to break. In the breaking, there was abundance. In breaking, there was sharing. Communion, Eucharist. In the breaking of bread, there was sharing. In the breaking of Jesus' body, there was abundance that was shed to the world. This is the paradox of the gospel of Jesus. That in vulnerability and brokenness, there was fullness. There was a sharing that happens from that place. I'm talking a little bit about the discipleship journey today. The discipleship journey, can I be honest? Like, there are seasons where it's just traumatic and hard. It's messy, there's loss. It feels like, God, you called me here and I've been faithful, but why? Why am I hurting? Why are my relationships not working out? Why am I starting again? Why do I feel these old sins and thoughts and patterns creeping up again? There are so many things in the discipleship path where it can feel more messy and complex as we grow older. It's more nuanced. But I believe that in this frame of understanding the significance of the breaking and the sharing, we begin to see that it was always God's plan to allow us to break. He's not trying to just fix us immediately, but He's trying to meet us in that place of honesty where we're being stripped down from our cultural identity. Oh my gosh, why can't Koreans just get me? Why are Koreans so frustrating? Like, why do I, day by day, I'm living in Korea, why do they do that? And we're brushing up on the culture. There's this cultural tension that we're feeling. We feel lonely, we feel lost, we feel stripped. I want to encourage you guys today, through this passage, their eyes opened when they were able to see in the reality of their lives, just eating dinner with friends, that in the act of breaking, they remembered Jesus. They remembered Jesus. Fullness was broken and given to all. And through Jesus' breaking, we live, we eat, we heal, we find wholeness in His brokenness. And so I want to kind of draw a picture for us today. And I know we're like all from different parts of the world. And you might not call this place your home church, and that's okay. But think about your church at home. What would it look like for our church to become a space of safety and vulnerability? A place where people can open up and break bread. Where we can hold space for one another in their story and in their pain. And withhold judgment, to cover in love, to journey in grace, to be an ecclesia, a home for those along the way. What would it look like to be a safe space, a refuge, a place of rest for those that are on their own journey in their discipleship? I think this is the heart of the gospel. We heal when people come together. The power is not in our brokenness. The power is in Jesus. But the power is in us unraveling in the safety of the gospel and God's power and grace flowing through, in and through us to those around us. It's nothing crazy. It's nothing crazy that we do. But in the church and community coming together, there's something that God does in and through us. Your spiritual journey cannot be done alone. And I believe that each and every single one of us we're a gift. We're a gift. You yourself and your journey with the Lord, it's a gift to those around you. You're a gift to a community somewhere. And your realness and vulnerability and openness becomes the gift to that community.
your openness to God as you unravel in His grace and learn to be honest with God. As you learn to, because it's like, it seems so simple, but it's like we don't want, unless it's figured out here, we feel like God won't receive us. So we won't approach Him until we feel like we've figured this out. And then we won't open to others because we haven't figured this out. Because the rawness is so raw. You don't want to, maybe, it might be a little too much for that person for you to be raw and real. And I mean, we talked about it in previous weeks, but it's like, if we're not even real with ourselves sometimes, it's this journey. It's like all threefold, like myself, God, with others. It's surely a journey and a process. But if you were to open your heart to the Lord in honesty and come as you are in the gospel and open your heart to those around you, being in process, owning that, and just opening that to others, there is an abundance that God does. There's grace that flows through that, and you become the gift to your community. More than what you do and what your spiritual gifts are, you yourself become the gift to that community when you learn to be vulnerable, embrace your humanity, and open in His grace, in the safety of God's grace. And when a community comes together and bands together and understands the power that's hidden in weakness, as it says in 2 Corinthians chapter 12, the power that's perfected in weakness. When a community comes around that and begins to understand the power that's in that, the sky's the limit. God begins to bring healing because we become an extension of God's heart to the people around us, and we allow them to break and unravel, and we don't judge them in that. Am I speaking to somebody today? It's awfully quiet in this place. Amen. Thank you, sir. Thank you, my man. Can I just make an exhortation and a charge today? Don't settle for Sunday Christianity. Seek deep relationships this year. Don't allow the fear of rejection to keep you on an island and isolated. Resist the temptation to isolate. And look for new relationships. Open yourself with wisdom and courage. Open yourself to people around you, to the church. And especially for those of you that are living in Korea, don't let the culture shock of being in Korea make you self-protect and shore up defenses and try to compensate in other ways. Just Korea. And I'm not saying there's not something wrong with that. Maybe the Lord can, even today, just gently bring your heart back. That's not going to fill your heart. You're not going to grow on an island. You're not going to just grow because you have this amazing New Year's Year plan of like how many times you're going to work out and the books you're going to read and all the conference and seminars that you're going to go. The core of who you are, it's going to change when we open it to God, open it to our brothers and our sisters on this journey. And as we learn the significance and the paradox of communion. In His breaking, there was sharing in abundance to the world. And so, church, don't be a bystander this year. Enter into community. If you're in Ark and you're in Seoul, doesn't have to be Ark, but step into a community, serve, jump 2 feet in, say, I'm here, and gift us with your presence wherever you go. If you're going back home, gift that whatever community that God sends you with your presence. You don't need to do anything. Show up. You're in process. We all are messy. We all are dysfunctional. Me too. But we have a God. We have a God. We have grace. We have the love of God. So high, so deep, so far. Can't see the end of His love. There's enough for all of us. We can cover over all those deficiencies in love. Above all, let love cover over you, me, and our community. Church, I want to invite us today. Would you come as you are? Maybe open your heart to the Lord and just kind of think where you've been. Have you been just kind of chugging along? Or maybe you've been resisting the stripping process. You've been resisting the descent because it's afraid to go down there. And it's like, oh, I'm trying to survive, I'm trying to stay afloat, but the descent can feel very daunting. But what if the Lord was leading you through this stripping process? What would it look like if that was actually, it was through the valley of the shadow of death that Jesus was leading you through? What if that was deeper discipleship, deeper love for God, deeper love for others? What if the path was down and through that mess and hardships? All the stuff that feels like I don't want to deal with. What if God brought you to Korea to strip you from all the cultural identity of your hometown, to take you deeper, to say that it's not about those things. You are my child. You are my beloved.